Hello and welcome to Pleasure Reading. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and this is a podcast about the pleasure of reading, where I share curated reading lists, author rankings, chats with my bookish friends, and more. If you too take pleasure in reading, I hope that you will subscribe and share this show with a friend. Cheers to your next best book. Hello, and welcome back to Pleasure Reading, a podcast about all of the pleasurable aspects of reading, from our favorite books to the things our friends recommend to, in this episode, midnight release parties that are super, super fun. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and on this show, I talk about my favorite books. And very soon, I will be talking to some of my bookish friends about their favorite books as we invite our first guests onto the podcast. But before we get to that, I thought I might experiment with a bit of a monthly wrap-up episode. So at the end of last year, I did an episode with 30-second reviews of all 150 books that I read in 2024, which was a wild ride of a time. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever want to do it again. It was very long and it took quite a bit of time to edit. And I was thinking that instead I might recap my books at the end of each month or every couple months, depending on how much I'm reading. So we're going to try that out with this episode. Maybe I'll love it. Maybe I won't. Maybe you'll love it. Maybe you won't. And we'll just see how it goes. Maybe this will be the first of many 30-second review episodes. Maybe it will be the first and only 30-second review episode. We will see how it goes. In the month of January 2025, I read 15 books. This is fascinating to me because I spent the entire month believing that I was in a reading rut. I said it to myself, I said it to my partner, I said it to my friends. I was like, I am just not reading right now. And when I look at this list, I am like, Amelia, that is obviously a lie. You read 15 books in 30 days because I'm recording this on the 30th. And that is a lot of books. So I don't know why I thought I was in a rut. I think what I was actually in a rut about was reading for content creation. So I had these sort of visions of some different reading projects that I might take on this month. I thought I might read more dark academia, which I think I will in February. I thought I might do a whole bunch of new romance reading, and none of that just quite came to be. Instead, I just did some pleasure reading. I let myself be a mood reader. I let myself read whatever I wanted, and I dabbled in quite a few different genres and sorts of things this month. So now we'll move in to the part where I tell you each book I read and give you a quick 30-second review. So the first book I read in 2025 was Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This is a horror novella. It features a queer couple, Rosemary and Ash. They meet at the farmer's market. They have really cute and a little bit weird kind of courtship. And then some shit goes down. So I can't tell you anything else about it, but I gave it 5 stars. I was super into this. I thought it was very fun, very well paced, and a very quick read. And I really liked it. Because I liked that so much, the second book I read in 2025 was Guillotine by Delilah S. Dawson. I talked about this book way back in my Pink Horror TBR, I think in October of 2024. And after I recorded that episode, I proceeded to not read any of the books on my Pink Horror list. And if you didn't listen to that episode, Pink Horror just meant that these were horror books with pink covers. It wasn't that deep. But for some reason, this month, I actually read 2 of my Pink Horror books. So I guess January was the month that I actually wanted to do that. And again, the second book I read this month/year was Guillotine by Delilah S. Dawson. This had a very fun premise. We have our main character, Des, who has started dating this super rich dude. His name is Patrick. And she kind of manipulates her way into an invitation to his family's private island for the weekend. And they go to the island. And the weekend they go to the island, she discovers the staff is planning to revolt. So there is some shit going down. The title Guillotine is a sort of eat the rich illusion. And then that gets a little literal. Well, maybe not literal. I don't think anybody eats anybody. if I remember correctly, but it does get violent. So this book was definitely a fun read. It felt a little bit like it had a sort of reality TV kind of vibe to it. And I really enjoyed it. I think I liked Bloom better, but both of these reads really got me into Delilah S. Dawson's horror novellas, and I would read more of them. After that, I read Expiration Dates by Rebecca Searle. This was recommended to me by my friend Caro. I had bought this book when it came out and never read it. So I was really excited to read it this month. I loved it. And I'm not going to say any more about it because I'm going to talk a lot about it in an episode coming out very soon about my all-time fave romances. So more to come on Expiration Dates by Rebecca Searle. I have essentially the same thing to say about my next book. The fourth book I read in January was Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This is a sapphic period romance meets mystery detective noir meets urban fantasy monster story. There's a lot going on in under 150 pages, and it was a huge surprise and delight to me how much I liked this book. It's another one I'm going to talk about in my 5-star romance episode that is coming, I think, next week. So you have to wait to hear more of my thoughts on this book, but you don't have to wait very long. Up next, I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries series, and it was so much fun. I did not know going in that it was written from the perspective of a murder bot, which I guess I should have based on the name of the series. But anyway, I really enjoyed the POV in this book. I liked the world building that they did. And we're going to talk about this one a lot more in our first guest episode that is coming up, I believe, in March. So more to come on All Systems Red by Martha Wells. After that, I read Second Night Stand by Corellia and Faye Stetz Waters. This is a writing duo, and they are a couple. They are a queer couple. And I was just so excited to read this book. I had read another book by Corellia Stetz Waters called Satisfaction Guaranteed. And that was a super fun queer romance about the owner of a queer sex store. And so I hoped that this book was going to be just as fun. The sort of setup for this book is that we have two main characters who are part of different types of dance troupes, and they're competing on a reality show, essentially to find like the best dance group in the US. And the winner of the show will get, I don't know, $1 million, I think. It's like some large amount of money. And both of our main characters really need that money. They're the leaders of their troupes. They need the money for different things in their lives. And so they join this competition. They meet after the auditions for the show, and they don't know that each other are in different groups at that point in time. And then they both make the show. And when they arrive for like the first day of filming, they see each other and they're kind of like, oh shit. They had a great hookup that was meant to be a one-night stand. And now they are going to have to be encountering each other, engaging with each other, and competing against each other for the upcoming weeks. I really loved the setup of this, and I thought it was just a really good time. This was a very like feel good 4-star kind of romance for me. After that, we get to the midnight release party part of this episode, because after that, I read Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. I did go to a midnight release party. It was hosted by the very, 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 very cool small bookstore in my town. And there were a ton of people there. I think like almost 100 people came through, which where I live is a lot of people in one bookstore. I took my dad to this launch party and it was so much fun. We did a little scavenger hunt. We had some hot chocolate. We had some snacks. And then I got my book and I went home and I got in bed and I read the prologue and I fell asleep. So that was the beginning of my Onyx Storm journey. But I spent the rest of that week reading this book and I enjoyed it so much. I understand why a lot of people don't love Fourth Wing, don't love the Empyrean series. That's fine. You don't have to like it. I'm not even here to ride for it as like great literature. I'm not even sure I'm here to ride for it as like a good book. I just think it is so fun to read. I do believe that Rebecca Yarros is great at pacing and plotting her books. I don't know that she's like the best writer in the world. And sometimes I think her characters are a little flat. But Onyx Storm is the third out of 5 books in this series. And even though it was like a middle book, which I feel like middle books always kind of suffer from a sort of like stagnation of the plot, this really worked for me. I enjoyed it. And I think that if you are open to Fourth Wing and reading the series, I do recommend it. After that, as a little palate cleanser, I went for a romance. I read 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. And this book is going to get a big, big, big shout out in next week's 5-star romance episode. So you can wait to hear about why I gave it 5 stars then. Apparently, after I read a bunch of romance and romantasy in a row, I really wanted to go the absolute opposite direction. And I read 2 extreme horror novellas. And what I discovered in that process is that extreme horror is not for me. I don't need to be grossed out while I'm reading a book. I like to be scared. I like to read horror. I like ghosts. I like supernatural things. But I just don't really like when humans are super violent at each other, to each other, with each other. It's just not for me. So I read Rest Stop by Nat Cassidy and Blue Jay by Megan Stockton. And I think that each of these were like well enough written. They had a strong enough plot. I don't know that like I would critique them in terms of what they intended to be and what they were, but they were extremely not for me. And that's what I learned by my like toe dip into extreme horror. I kind of like backpedaled a little bit into some YA horror / true crime / mystery with my next read, which was Dead Girls Talking by Megan Cooley Peterson. This is a book that I had gotten from the library like a million times and not read. I just kept requesting it on Libby and then putting it on hold after I didn't read it and then checking it out again and then putting it on hold again and then checking it out again. I think I did this for like 6 months, essentially since last fall. I have been doing that with this book. And I was like, I am finally going to read this book. So the general premise of Dead Girls Talking is that this teenager, Bettina, or Bet's dad killed her mom. He's been in prison for a really long time. And this has been the subject of a ton of podcasts, books, murder tours, and it's just like haunted Bettina her whole life. And at the opening of the book, another woman is killed and is killed in the same way that her mother was killed, which has made some people believe that maybe her father didn't do it after all. And so in this book, Bettina teams up with one of her classmates, Eugenia, and they investigate the crimes and try to figure it out. So it's definitely like a murder mystery. It's got this sort of like pretty dark setup, to be honest. And for some reason, just like something about it didn't quite land for me. The book had a really dark sense of humor, which I thought I was going to like. When I started reading the book, I liked it. And then over time, I just like felt like all the characters were deflecting all the time. And I didn't really get anybody's motivation to do anything that they did. And there were some like red herrings that just felt like red herrings. And when we got to the end, I was like, I don't even like how this ended. So I have had this issue before with YA books that include fictionalized true crime. And I think that I just need to stay clear of that going forward. I don't like to engage with true crime content writ large. Like I don't listen to true crime podcasts. I don't watch true crime TV shows. Something in me thought that like I would enjoy the fictionalized version of this, but I had a similar reaction when I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson last year. And I think that this just isn't for me. So I'm just going to call it good with true crime, nonfiction or fiction, and especially when it's YA. I'll just leave it be going forward. Okay, 4 more books, and 3 of them are romance. I think after all that darkness, I was like, we're just going to have a light rest of the month. So my next read was Just Some Stupid Love Story by Caitlin Doyle. This is another one that was recommended by my friend Caro. Caro is basically my romance go-to. And this book is a romantic comedy about someone who writes romantic comedies. So Molly Marks writes Hollywood rom-coms, but she does not believe in love. She's only fallen in love once, and that was with her high school boyfriend, and she ghosted him after high school. And the book opens at their high school reunion, where Molly encounters that boyfriend, Seth, for the first time since she ghosted him. And he is the life of the party. He's a romantic. He's super personable. And she's just sort of a like Debbie Downer sort of type. And they reconnect at this reunion and make a sort of wager about 5 couples there. Basically saying, like, do you think these people are going to break up or stay together or get together by our next reunion in 5 years? And the 5th couple on the list is the 2 of them. Basically, Seth is like carrying a torch for her and puts them on the list to be like, we're going to come to the next reunion together. And Molly's like, absolutely not. We are not. So the book takes place over the next 5 years between these reunions, and we get to follow kind of their love story and what happens throughout that time. I have to say, I never thought I would say this, and I can't believe I'm admitting to this publicly, but there is a sexting scene in this book where they're like sexting on their phones, sending texts and then videos that I thought was just like one of the hottest things I have read in quite a while. So this is definitely a sexy, leaning into smutty romance, but that's not like a huge part of the plot. There are just a couple of moments or scenes like that, but one of them I just thought was so well done, and I really enjoyed Just Some Stupid Love Story by Caitlin Doyle. Next, I read Cassandra in Reverse by Holly Small, something like that. And this is another book that I read for our upcoming guest episode. So I will not blurb it here, but I will say that I really liked it. And if you're interested in books with time travel and books with great neurodivergent representation, you might want to check this out. And we'll talk more about why in that upcoming episode. Okay, last 2 books for my January reads. Next, I read The Night Guest by Hildur Knudstøtter. This was another book that was on my pink horror TBR. You might have seen it floating around the internet if you are a person who likes to read horror. It came out last fall and was very popular. And the sort of premise of this book is that our main character wakes up every morning super exhausted, and she can't figure out why. And eventually, she realizes that she is walking miles and miles every night, and she doesn't remember it at all. And over the course of the book, which it's a novella, so it's like over the course of the next 100 pages, she has to uncover what is happening. Where is she walking? Why is she walking? How is she walking? All of this has to come out through the course of the book. And I think that it definitely kept me intrigued. Like, it kept my interest. I really wanted to know what was happening. I just don't know if it stuck the ending. I have to be honest. So if you have like an hour, honestly, maybe 2 hours to give to an interesting horror novella and decide what you think about it, this is definitely worth your time. I don't know if I loved it or if I will return to it, but I still feel intrigued by it, which is always a good sign. And then my last read of the month was Beg, Borrow, or Steal by Sarah Adams. This is the 3rd book of the When in Rome series, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. The first one was about this like famous pop star, I think, who tries to run away from her life and ends up in Rome, Kentucky, and falls for somebody there. And the second book is about like her sister and how her sister falls for the celebrity's bodyguard or something like that. And this 3rd book was about 2 feuding 2nd grade teachers and neighbors who find themselves teaming up. This is a rivals to lovers romance. It is also set in Rome, Kentucky. I enjoyed figuring out how it tied into the other books, even though I read those a while ago and didn't totally remember them. And it was just like a good read. If you have never heard of that series and you love romance, you might want to check it out. And if you don't like romance or Kentucky, then maybe don't read it. Not that Kentucky plays a huge role. I think it's just a nice little pun for the name. So that was my reading for the month of January. I read 15 books in January 2025. And even though I felt like I was in a rut, I actually got a lot of reading done. And I think part of that is because a lot of these were novellas, right? Literally half of my reading in January was novellas, 7 out of the 15 books. And this was a nice reminder to me that even if I'm not feeling super motivated in my reading, even if I don't like have a project kind of guiding my reading list for the month, it is so satisfying and pleasurable and enjoyable and stimulating for me to pick up a short book and just like spend a couple hours reading the whole thing before I go to bed one night. That is definitely how I've been spending my winter, and I am loving it. So If you want to check out any of these books, they are all linked in the show notes. If you make a purchase through those links, I will receive a small affiliate payment, which I take as a little tip in gratitude for the book recommendation. If you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you review on Apple, you can say that you like the monthly review episodes, and that'll let me know that I should make more of them. Or if nobody likes them, then maybe I won't. Who knows? I enjoy doing this, but I'm not sure if I'll want to do it every month. So we shall see what happens. Thank you again and so much for tuning in to Pleasure Reading. I hope that your January was also full of great books, and I will be back next week with a romance episode just in time for Valentine's Day. Until then, here's to your next best book.